Well, sorry for all the technical issues, but I think that we finally have it. And well, sorry if it keeps on fluctuating a little bit. Well, having said that, let us introduce ourselves into the world of Rita Duffy. We are very happy to have her back in South America. Actually, we met her in a conference held by AIS, the Association of Irish Studies for the South of America, held in Chile in 2018. And so we were very happy to have her there, but we did not have an activity as this one in Argentina. And thanks to the support of the Embassy of Ireland and the Government of Ireland, which has the guest professor program, we have had the great opportunity to have Rita in Mexico, Brazil, and now in Argentina, because this is a program for Latin America. And I would really like to thank Deirdre O'Flaherty, the consul of the Embassy of Ireland in Argentina, for her support, because she has been guiding us along the way. This is the first time that we are applying to this program, and we are very happy about that. So I think you know me, but just in case, my name is Verónica Repetti, and together with Paula Ortiz, we work in the Irish Studies Chair at USAL. And we are very happy to see that Irish Studies the interest in Irish Studies is growing in our country, in the region. And thanks to that, Rita will also be at Universidad de La Plata tomorrow morning, Universidad de Lanús tomorrow evening at 6 p.m., just in case you would like to go or spread the word, and in the National University of La Pampa. So that is on Friday. I don't think we will be able to go, but if you know someone in La Pampa who might be interested, please, again, spread the word. So having said that, I would like to introduce Rita very briefly. We got this from her webpage. So I'm just going to read the intro, Rita, because it's you have been, yes, really a really productive artist, a visual artist from Ireland. So I will just say, and then you will know her through her work, that she was born in Belfast, Ireland. She graduated with BA Honours and MA in Fine Art from University of Ulster. She's one of Ireland's groundbreaking visual artists, initiating major collaborative art projects. She's a visiting lecturer at international universities with contributions to numerous publications and media engagements. She was made an honorary member of the Royal Society of Architects for developmental work in the built environment and an associate at the Goldsmiths College London, collaborating on artistic exchange with Argentina, looking at the role of art in post-conflict societies. Rita's work is held in museum and private collections worldwide, and her public art projects continue to grow in scale and ambition. So welcome again. We're very happy to have you here this afternoon. Evening.
I'm nervous to move this microphone. Thank you, Veronica. It's a pleasure to be back in Argentina. And I expect, just watch the image, okay? Is it still? No. Just bear with us one moment, okay? We got good? Okay, how's that? Okay, just 1 second. It looks like you either hear me or see the work. There it is. It's coming back. No, it's gonna. Okay, do you want to take that one away? Okay, hold on 1 second. Right, we've got it. Okay. Keep your fingers crossed that the image stays on the screen while I talk. It'll settle down and it'll be fine. Anyway, I'll go ahead and start with the flickering image, and hopefully, yeah, we really need the images. Just 1 second. Let's try and get this right here. lead that you're teaching there that is the tricky bit. Okay. How are we doing? Okay, that looks like a more solid. This looks like a more solid connection. Nope. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to start. This is an image of my studio on the border between the north and south of Ireland. It's an old courthouse in a village called Ballyconnell. I worked for about 25 years in Belfast and then decided that it was time to kind of move beyond. To move out of Belfast onto the British border in Ireland. And I think borders are very, very interesting places because there's a sense of confusion in borders. And I happen to think they're very creative places. Borders are neither here nor there, which is kind of the title I've given this talk. But they also allow us to become a little bit confused. And it's from that space that I think art emerges, for me anyway. So on to the first slide. And even if it is a little bit fuzzy, I think you'll see, perhaps even just for a flicker, an image, an image of a woman being cut in two. I call this work Partition, and it's work from a fairly recent series of work that I presented last year. You will note that no one is cutting the woman in half. The saw is held in one place, and it's as if there's some strange psychology at work. When I think of partition, when I think of divisions, I think of the division within myself, the left and right hemisphere, that sense of division between people. And this is the area, the territory, the psychological kind of space that I like to work in. Now I'm going to take you back and then take you forward. These paintings were made back in the late 80s. This was made on a trip to Derry, which is in the northwest. See, it's this wire here. Let's give this another go. Okay, we might be in luck this time. This image was made visiting the wall city of Derry. It was the first city that was planted, and okay, I think I can relax. I think it's going to stay steady. Okay, so we can kind of like, we got it. As long as I don't see a flickering over my shoulder, everything's good. Basically, this walled city was the first kind of successful plantation by the British into Ireland. There'd been previous attempts, but there's something about Derry and the huge heavy walls, and it was a siege that was kind of that dictated pretty much the subsequent history of Ireland. I've always been really interested in history and how it affects our lives today. I went back to Belfast and I made this painting. Now these are very large paintings, very traditionally painted oil on gesso ground. And I would walk around making notations, making little drawings in my notebook, and looking at kind of people on either side of the wall. Even though we have a peace process, we still have these walls that divide our community. People think the war in Belfast, the war in the north, was something between Protestant and Catholic. I don't think so. I would argue that what we went through was a legacy of colonialism. And gradually, this first colony of Britain in Ireland is releasing itself from the past. I went to art school in the 80s, and I was very keen to make work that was about what was going on around me. I made a series of, excuse me, I made a series of about 35 big drawings influenced by Otto Dix and George Gross, German painters who were working with political themes in Germany after the First World War. And I thought somehow that positioning myself right there in Belfast, making work that was about what was going on around me, how I felt as a woman living in that city, had some chance of reaching the universal. And I remember talking with Seamus Heaney, and that advice of his to go to the root of where you are, to begin where you begin, was the way forward in writing, in theatre, and in visual art. And it was a difficult journey, because not everybody at the art school that I went to was supportive of this approach. To me, it was very much a strategy of anti-colonialism. There's Mother Ireland on the left, Mother Ulster on the right. I grew up with these long-suffering, kind of overburdened females, a kind of iconic figures of my mother and her 5 sisters. Ireland was a matriarchal society, and somehow the violence in the north silenced women. And I'm very glad to say that silence has been broken. We have incredible writers coming from Belfast. I think of Anna Burns and The Milkman. And if any of you are really interested in that female psychology in Belfast during the Troubles, I would strongly advise you to read Anna Burns' Milkman. It's much more eloquent than I could ever hope to be. But these images, I was trying to kind of evoke that figure of womanhood in Ireland that I grew up with. On the left, segregation. On the right, the comfortable woman. And segregation spoke to the experience of our children being divided and sent to different schools. Education is a hugely important aspect in any society. So to have children going to state schools, which were Protestant schools that didn't teach any Irish history, or to Catholic schools, which were independent and did teach the Irish language and Irish history. I'm not sure what the solution is, but I suspect that we need to be courageous and to amalgamate our schools and share some effort at telling a joint history. On the right-hand side is the comfortable woman, and she's kind of, I suppose, suggestive of my analysis of the difficulties or the situation, the real divisions in society in the North, which, like lots of places across the world, is really a division between rich and poor. This was a painting in a kind of mural scale. I didn't want to make murals. because I valued the independence of my voice as an artist too much to join the lads who were making murals that were very much of one side or the other. And this image was inspired by a film made by Anne Crilly called Mother Ireland. And in that film, there was a little bit of archive footage of the very first Rose of Tralee beauty contest, which was kind of aiming to market Ireland as a beautiful, fair colleen to the American Tourist Board. On the left-hand side, you can see the politics of what we were living, the hunger striker, the general, who's also in the center image, kind of the generals were down the side, scoring the beauty. I mean, horrific carry on, but I tried to be a little ironic with it. And on the right-hand side, the figure of religion and church. Gradually, I started to make images that were hoping to reach beyond Belfast. There's a suggestion in the coloration that we are somewhere else. There's a scorched sand on the left-hand side, banquet, on the right-hand side, plantation. And the army in Belfast constructed these forts, these fortresses around police stations. Really, it was high security. The table and chairs suggest the negotiation table, or perhaps it's the family table where we learn our bigotries, our prejudices, or our humanity. At one stage, I suggested, as the peace process was beginning, and the army and the whole military complex was being dismantled, I suggested that we turn one of the watchtowers on the border into an artwork. And interestingly enough, I managed to get this right up through the Northern Ireland office and was brought to one of the watchtowers by Major Colonel Harbour from the British government, or from the British Army. And it was very interesting. I managed to go inside the fortified area of the watchtower, and you can see, I'm not sure if you can see on this slide, but the word south is written. Presumably, this word is there to kind of direct a young squatty from Birmingham as to which direction he's looking. But those hills were the kind of ancient, the Cooley Mountains, they were the ancient territory that Cuchulainn, the kind of warrior of Ulster, defended. Black Pig's Dyke. There was always a kind of a division. There was always a boundary. Ulster was always separate in ways from the rest of Ireland. And I would argue it's still the most interesting part of Ireland because of those complexities. Art sometimes for me comes from conversations. I sold a painting to an RUC detective, and as he was leaving, he suggested if ever there was anything I needed to give him a shout. So very quickly, I asked him, could I have access to 2 Kalashnikovs? I think a bottle of whiskey changed hands, and I was brought to the weapons holding unit of the police. I decided to cast the mold of this Kalashnikov in chocolate, because chocolate has always been this decadent food of romance, and I grew up with this romantic fighting hero in Irish culture. I showed it in the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, and people only smelt chocolate. I negotiated and showed it in West Belfast in an old Victorian display cabinet, and people only saw the weapon. And in hushed tones, they read the serial number and wondered, where did she get that? So it was very interesting that one artifact, one artwork can have such a different interpretation. As an artist in Belfast, I always worked on public projects and on projects within my studio. I find one feeds the other. This was a project called Drawing the Blinds, and we created a wall of portraits in a tower block at the bottom of the Falls Road with an army watchtower or with an army base on the top. I passed this every day going to school on the Falls Road through the 70s. And on the night we launched the project, the tower block turned into a lantern, celebrating the people who had lived through very difficult times in that particular location. This project called Thaw was a response to the suggestion that we were going to rebuild the Titanic, which initially was built in Belfast as a bid for the European Capital of Culture. And whilst I thought it would be very interesting to rebuild the Titanic, but a little repetitive, and a good artwork, in truth, should open up the narrative. And that story, to me, is a very important story about how human beings have behaved in nature. And now we are at a stage where climate change is probably the most urgent issue of our times. And it was also a symbol locally of the suffering that people had gone through during all the violence, all the trouble, all the warfare of 35 years. And I read and researched enormously around this project. Obviously, it's very difficult to bring an iceberg to Belfast on one's own, but it certainly pulsed through the work from there on. I got a copy of the Iron Deck plan of the Titanic, and I repopulated it with tiny little figures inspired by Goya from all the things that I remember seeing and happening on the street in Belfast. This is a drawing that is about 30 feet long. It's kind of hard to show you. Speaking of public art projects, I made this reinterpretation of The Last Supper with the Shankill Women's Centre, and I gathered women together from right across Belfast and some from the south, celebrating all the roles of women. And even if you notice, Jesus is a teenage mother, and to her right, in in the picture, is a woman using a mobile phone to stop slavery coming into Belfast. And this was a woman called Mary Ann McCracken. And they prevented slavery from coming through the port of Belfast. So women in Belfast have a lot to be proud of and a lot to work together on. This was a more recent photo montage called Raft, and it was inspired by Gerricolt's Raft of the Medusa, except on this raft, we have the ingredients for Irish stew, which is lamb, onions, carrots, and potatoes. This was made in response to Brexit and made in conjunction with young men living on either side of the border between North and South. Drawing has always been my first love. I think through my hand. It's an intense process of allowing things to emerge Sometimes I think it's similar to praying or meditating. I don't always know what I'm doing, but things emerge. And this, I made a series of very large drawings comparing the linen, the white linen of my city of Belfast with the large white landscape of the Norwegian Arctic. I'd gone there on a residency to look at icebergs and ice and to contemplate all things frozen. Textiles in general have been a big part of my work. My mother was a weaver. I come from a place where linen was produced, and because of the linen, we ended up with an aircraft industry, a rope industry. Linen was a huge part of the tradition of Belfast. This, however, is a Parker jacket similar to the one Sinead O'Connor wore with her first hit single on Top of the Pops music program on the BBC. And I found this in a small ad hoc museum that was being set up by women who had served sentences in Armagh Women's Prison. And this belonged to Mairead Farrell, who was a volunteer in the Troubles, a female volunteer that was shot in Gibraltar. And I was confused about how I felt about her. She was the same age as me, and she had chosen a path of violent resistance, and I had chosen a path of art. So I didn't make any decision. I painted the image as a haunted jacket with a spirit or some other kind of inhabitant. I saw a little piece of footage on the television from Guantanamo Bay, and I remembered I have an orange jumpsuit in my studio. I don't use a coat hanger to hang it up, but the coat hanger presented a question mark, and the question mark was essential in suggesting that there was something important to be considered. I titled the painting Guantanamo, a Mass, a Mat. And all you Latin scholars will know what that means, but it's basically suggesting that what you allow to happen to others might quite possibly happen to yourself. Again, textiles of sorts. My mother was from the south. We lived in Belfast in a strange place beside the Ulster Museum, but our community was not always welcoming. She would spend the winter knitting Aran sweaters so that when my father got his holidays from the aircraft factory, we would exit Belfast on the 11th night, which was the beginning of the marching season for those that had won the battle in Derry. So we would end up looking like the Clancy brothers, going out to the car, all dressed in itchy Aran sweaters, as my mother's kind of small but radical subversive statement that we had a culture, we were Irish, and we were leaving and letting them get on with it. I was commissioned in Derry to make a big project in 2013. I presented the shirt factory project. Now, Derry was a city built on the labor of women who sewed shirts. We created a museum in an old shirt factory that was actively employing 6 women who sewed things that I made. But first of all, I made a series of about 40 drawings that were gathered from things that I found around the city. Observing, looking in windows, basically being curious about life in Derry. And then we produced a whole range of products and a whole range of manifestos, because the shirt factories in Derry were mentioned in Karl Marx's manifesto. And we use this methodology as a way of advertising what we were doing to the local people and having the older women come in and recording their stories of working in shirt factories. You can see on the left, we printed text, dishcloths with old archive photographs, one woman and 5 men looking on. And on the right-hand side, we have bee special honey. And the bee specials were a very specific group of armed police that not everybody liked. But the honey was about taking the bitter taste of history from our mouths. The civil rights cushion was made from the very first civil rights poster in Derry, and it ended up going to America when the project was brought there, and it met with the I Have a Dream Martin Luther King pillow, because there was a inspiration and a relationship between the civil rights movement in America and the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland. 2016, I was commissioned to make the souvenir project in Dublin, which was looking back at 100 years since the rebellion in Dublin. And I made a total of over 50 products that were humorous, historical, political, and presented as limited editions and sent in military medical boxes across the country. Here we see on the left baking soda that's used in bread making as a way of describing how people rise up and rebel. And on the right-hand side, the black and tan shoe polish. Black and tans refer to the British military who put down the rebellion. I worked with the Irish Countrywomen's Association, who I believe to be the real army of Ireland. They take from food from the land and provide nourishment for the nation. Rebel Razor is a shaving cream that asks people, for Ireland's sake, turn the other cheek. This is a product that was made when the project went to Paris. My grandfather, here he is, was killed in the Somme when my father was 3. And in these envelopes, I put sticking plasters, band-aids for small cuts on the fingers or hands. And the contradiction was that this was the first time that people were killed through mechanized warfare. In any given day, thousands of men were killed by the machinery of war. And part of that project, part of the contents of that project were sewing kits that you could buy and take home and hem. On the left-hand side, we have Unite Ireland sewing kit with instructions to go carefully around the border. And on the right-hand side, we have Make Your Own Markovich, who was one of the women who fought in the rebellion. And you can dress her with jewels in her army uniform, or in her fancy dress, she can have her revolver in hand. The choice is yours. On to a series of drawings that I made in 2021. I called these The Emperor Has No Clothes, based on that child's fairy tale story about pretending that everything's okay, when in truth you're being shown quite the opposite. And this was a series of 10 drawings that instead of listening to the radio and the continual reports from America and the lunacy that was unfolding during the Trump presidency, I made these drawings because there has always been a tradition of artists responding politically. They're ironic, satirical. On the right-hand side here, you can see the cheese grater that is supporting this phrase, "Make America Great Again." And they're very much in keeping with Hogarth and other artists in the past who have made comment politically. And those images led to a series of large paintings directly from that series of 10 drawings came this work, which is a very large canvas called Epiphany. And it was based on what happened on January 6th in America. There are a triptych of paintings ended up being the core of the recent exhibition that I mentioned at the very beginning with the image partition. And it's land, sea, and sky, which are means of transport. And I kept thinking about the refugees and the people stolen away and brought to America, the people desperate to get from one side of the Mediterranean to the other, the effects of climate change on how people are increasingly needing to move around, the effect of poverty and war on people needing to find refuge. This was the center image. It's called Sailing Belfast to Byzantium, and it takes its title from a wonderful Yeats poem. Obviously, this ship with the iceberg kind of again in the background is something familiar. There's enormous detail. If you care to kind of look at it closer, I suggest you go to the website. It's very hard to give you better illustration of this painting, but there is a little film of the painting in all its detail on the website. You can see the little hands in the foreground, which might be people drowning, or it might be echoing all of the people that died going across the Atlantic through famine or on those slave ships. I was reading Conran's Heart of Darkness, and I'm very, very interested in the legacy of colonialism as it's being played out across the world. There's some detail. And this is ornithopter, the other means of transport, this time inspired by the American Army leaving Kabul airport, heavily influenced by the work of Goya, the little flying men on the right-hand side. And that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation. I have a flag here that is cabbages, parsnips, and carrots. I've always believed that nationalism or having some sense of a national identity should be something nourishing. I am beginning to question the whole idea of nationalism on our planet today, looking at what's going on in under the banner of nationalism. Right now, some of these vegetables would be impossible to grow in certain places where at one time they would have grown. These are the things that we need to be thinking about, not flags. And to finish this talk, I'd like to read you a small piece by a wonderful Indian intellectual called Arundhati Roy. The only dream worth having is to dream that you will live while you are alive and die only when you're dead. To love and to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair, to never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple, to respect strength, never power, above all, to watch, to try and understand, to never look away and never, never forget. And I read that for the people of Gaza and Lebanon. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Rita, for taking us into this life of art that you have presented in connection to your country, to Ireland. Now we can have a moment to ask Rita anything about her presentation, about her work, to expand on any of the things that you have just heard. So just raise your hands, and we'll have one of the interpreters whom we thank because they have provided simultaneous interpretation. Well, we will. They can transfer the question into English for Rita. So if you want, you just raise your hands. Okay. So would you mind coming here so that we can? Oh, thanks. We have the microphone there.
Well, I'm going to ask the question in English directly, if that's okay.
Great.
Thank you very much, Rita, for the presentation and showing us your amazing art. And well, I don't know why you're in Argentina, but I was born in Coventry, but I grew up partly in Northern Ireland, and I live here now. And for 19 years, every time I get in a taxi, I'm asked about Ireland and the North, and there's a great curiosity here. So my question is how your work, you feel your work relates to Argentina in some way?
I first came to Argentina to research museums and how they function as a way of going forward after conflict. I think any society that has endured violence at the level that Argentina, I believe, and certainly I know Northern Ireland has, shares not just the trauma, but the questions and the reality of like, how do we live past this? How do we build peace? How do we build better societies? And I think I find it interesting to be here, to first of all, having seen those museums, but there is a sense that there's a shared narrative, not just through the symbols that I see in Latin American art, but in some of the ideals and principles that I've come across in Mexico, in Brazil, and the influence of that kind of Irish diaspora in Latin America is very interesting. I mean, a few days ago, I saw a film called, it was about the Putumayan Indians, and how Roger Casement researched and made public the horrendous treatment of human beings. I mean, you'd imagine that people would have been satisfied to get the rubber for free and get it handed to them. But they brutalized these people like they were some sort of sub-animal species. And it just seemed like that barbarism is in all of us. And it must be highlighted when it's encountered. So the idea of traveling, exchanging, looking at different places, I find it very fortifying and very inspiring to remember individuals like Roger Casement and to celebrate standing up and speaking out when it's required. And that never, ever dates or goes out of fashion. It's something that we must as human beings continually remember and revisit, and exchange and inspire each other. So yeah, I'm very, very pleased to be here in Argentina, and I'm very curious to see what's going on in Argentine society today.
Thank you.
Is there any other question for Rita?
Hello. Sorry. First of all, thank you for being here and for your presentation. I wanted to ask what feelings or what emotions come to you or arise when you're delving into your own country story, when you have to dig so deep into your own nation's positive and negative things?
It's not something that I kind of consciously think about doing. Quite often, it's something that's happening in my own life, and I come from that perspective into the why and how of what's in front of me. And it was very interesting being in Mexico, looking at the work of Frida Kahlo. I know Frida Kahlo is an industry in Mexico, but I still look at those paintings and I still see that there is such incredible, emotional, passionate revelation. And I think as an artist, I care more to kind of discover and uncover the things within myself rather than preach or advocate something specific for others. But in doing that, it's inevitable that other people can see parallels in their own lives. So looking at Irish history, looking at the experience of being an Irish woman and the experience of Irish women in the past, I hope I see improvement. Right now, there's a lot of inquiry going on about how women were treated, up until the 80s. We had Magdalen laundries. We had a situation where women were not allowed to keep their babies if they got pregnant outside marriage. There's things in Irish history that are despicable, brutal, and that I hope will never happen again. And the only way you make sure these things don't happen again is by thoroughly discussing and revealing how they did happen. And that's something I feel is very important for me as an artist, as a woman. And I want to kind of look at these things. And there is, who was it? Was it Ruskin said, there is beauty in truth. Truth is beauty. However ugly the truth is, there is beauty in the fact that we look for it. And I think that's my modus operandi.
Thank you, Rita, for your presentation. It was marvelous. I'm very impressed by your art, but I am also very moved by the social projects. What has been the impact and the reception of people in Derry or in Belfast or I remember the Soften the Border project? How have people received it?
I'm not altogether sure, but I do know that when we were working on those projects, there was generally a feeling of curiosity and energy, and that people that engaged with the project might in the beginning have been a little bit hesitant, but kind of went with it. I certainly learned a lot, and I do think that when you go close and ask people to show you their lives and what's important to them, there's generally a good response where people like to be noticed, people like to be asked, and it's very important that art isn't just for people who can afford to decorate their rooms with it, but that somehow it becomes a force for change, it becomes a force for empowerment, it becomes a force for celebrating identity and for questioning and playing. I mean, the women that I met on the border in the Soften the Border project, where we worked on a bridge where one village was on one side of the bridge and one village was on the other side of the bridge. In the center of the bridge, obviously there was a river underneath it, but it was like a handle on you went to one side to buy meat or to go to a restaurant. You went to the other side to have your car filled up with petrol or to stay in a bed and breakfast. So there was a sense that this was a semi-detached village. And on a Tuesday night, a group of women met and they were called the Border Knitters. I couldn't resist going to visit them. And gradually we collected a lot of old clothing and crocheted and sewed and made these big kind of orbs of cushions. I mean, I wasn't really particularly interested in any kind of artistic methodology. I just knew that this would work if we created a big kind of soft cushioned area in the center of the border, that somehow or other the message would relate. And it did. That community, Al Jazeera, BBC, there was broadcasts from all over the place, and it gave those people a voice of what it felt like to be living in a divided, difficult place on the Irish border, and how the negotiations in London about Britain leaving the EEC is going to affect them. So that kind of, it seemed like a purposeful, playful exchange that worked.
Any other question? Okay, Maria.
Thank you, Rita. It's amazing how you have translated reality onto the canvas. I have one question. If you can expand a little bit on this legacy that you mentioned about the fight against Protestant and Catholics, not being an actual fight, but legacy of colonialism. I think that is very important. And I have a second question, which is about identity. You talk about not having borders, like overcoming the border and the flags and all that, which I agree. How do you connect that with this era of excessive communication, that there are no borders, no identities, and at the same time, we again want to fight for the identity again, for some kind of identity? Maybe it's complicated, the second one, but the first one is if you could expand.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll take the first one.
Thank you.
The first one first. The idea of Protestant and Catholic, I mean, you go back into history and, the Reformation established Protestantism. You had the outplaying of that war, those religious wars in Ireland. But basically what happened was Ireland became the first colony of Britain. And it so happened that the Protestantism fell on one side and Catholicism was more identifiable with Irish nationalism. However, in the Belfast that I grew up in, very few people were attending churches of either side. They certainly were not holding with the values of any of these organizations. And it seemed nonsense to say it was Protestant versus Catholic. In fact, it seemed like almost an easy opt-out for the BBC when they were broadcasting about what was happening. And as a result, we are now looking at continual kind of revelation of what happened over the last 35 years of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And quite a lot of those revelations are that the British Army colluded with loyalism and that the British state actually killed its citizens. And whether we end up getting that officially revealed in British courts or not, we know it happened. Initially, we were suspicious that it was happening, and the powers that be didn't want to reveal it. I mean, the last Boris Johnson was very keen to wrap up the Troubles, asked several people that I know, historians, to write the definitive history of the Troubles of Northern Ireland. Nobody would take it on, understandably. And he had this legacy bill, which was basically drawing a line under anything further being revealed. And in fairness to the current Prime Minister in Britain, Keir Starmer, the first thing he did was to say, we must inquire further. It's hard to kind of undo the damage of history, but it's essential that we try. You look at the African American legacy in America, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody really wants to teach it in schools, and it continues as an open wound in American society, and it may well be their undoing after this election. Look at colonialism in other parts of the world, and you wonder why people are living in situations that are untenable right across Africa. And I'm not just talking about stuff that's stolen in museums. I think we need to begin the conversation about reparations. Second question. What was it again?
Thank you for answering the first one. Maybe this idea of dealing with the wounds, I mean, it's very complex.
Oh,
Yeah, and you need a lot of humility and love for truth.
Well, this is one of the things that I think about. I generally regard technology, when it's working, as a very positive thing.
Yes.
And artificial intelligence, I think, actually could be very interesting in that a lot of our energy and time that hopefully we'll have more of because of assistance from computers. A lot of that could be well used in teaching people at school level how to be empathetic, how to be compassionate. It shouldn't just be luck of the draw, depending on which household you're born into, but something that we should really start to celebrate as the core part of what it is to be human. And in terms of identity, when a huge hurricane refuses to recognize a border, when a massive ocean wave refuses to recognize a border, when the power of nature refuses to recognize a border, maybe we should be taking them less seriously. Now, I know there are practicalities, but I do think we've come to a point on this planet where we need to learn how to share better. I mean, I went into a shop this morning in Buenos Aires, and I was looking at something that cost 172,000 pesos. And I thought, how do I translate that into euros before I discover I can't afford it? And it seemed like these things, this whole economic system, this whole demand for continual economic growth, this whole project of capitalism that means some people get to be extraordinarily wealthy and some people don't have clean drinking water. I think that's reached the end of its sell-by date. And I think peacefully, we need to find some better way of structuring our societies. and making sure that we look after each other. It's as simple as that.
Thank you so much. Amazing. Is that answering my question about identity and the globalization and communication and all that? That you were like saying that no borders, in a way, is partly answering the need of just looking at each other as human beings and just erasing the borders, the flags. And my question was, at the same time, we see that communication and all the technology is like getting us more together, but we still have these differences. So how do you articulate all these phenomena?
Well, I think it's really important that we have mobile phones, that we can film things, that we can show each other what's actually happening. The big danger is that we get caught into believing things that aren't true, or that believing in this notion of multiple truths. And I think that's very well dealt with in a novel by Gogol, Lost Souls from the 17th century. So it's not something that we've just discovered in the last few years, but the idea of doing something bad and hiding what you're doing is ancient human behavior. I'm not so sure. I don't know, but I'm hopeful that somehow or other, having this technology, having the access to knowledge, having the access to communication, like I can write a few sentences and press a little button and have a friend in Japan read that. You know, we eat spaghetti and dance flamenco and all of the notion, all of the kind of crossovers from different cultures and societies seems immediate. And God knows, as an Irish person, you know, we've gone across the globe chatting and dancing and making music and working hard and messing around and laughing and generally kind of engaging with people. And it seems like a reasonable way to kind of allow others to do that. I am deeply ashamed that refugees coming to Ireland are not being treated better. It seems like a complete contradiction that we should refuse access to people because there are too many coming. And there is an argument that, you know, resources like healthcare and schools and housing and stuff are already under pressure in countries, and it's hard for people to adapt. But that takes me back to the reparations conversation, because if people didn't live in such dire circumstances, they might stay and improve those places. But if those places are being increasingly degraded through climate change, then we all need to pay attention, because we're in this together. None of us are separate.
I think there might be one comment on Zoom that Maite will transfer to Rita.
The comment says, good afternoon. What a pleasure it is to listen to you and seeing your work, at least through the screen.
Thank you.
So that shows that you have been seen, and you and your art have been seen online. So we thank the people that followed this very insightful presentation and talk with Rita. And well, I would really like to thank her again on behalf of our Irish Studies Chair. And also in reply to the question, you said, I don't even know why you are here. And I would like to answer that by saying that some months ago, we got together, and it was kind of a collaborative work that with the colleagues from Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, we got together And we decided to invite Rita, and you know why now, because she really deserves to be known, and her art and her work. And throughout this presentation, she has fully answered the question that we suggested to her about art being a transforming factor in society. We have seen that she has addressed throughout, all her art till today, and probably into the future, this idea that we need to discuss, we need to see, we need to reveal in order to make ourselves better as humanity. So thank you very much. My best wishes and our best wishes for your presentations tomorrow and on Friday in the other universities. And we really hope to see you again soon in Argentina. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bisa pindah, bisa. This was